So I gotta be honest, I thought I had recordings of the process and all this kind of stuff, but it ended up being really boring and not interesting at all. I have videos on YouTube scattered around and on Patreon of how I made the buildings, how I made the scenes in the previous scenes. So you can watch those if you kind of want like a full picture, but I do still want to explain how I made this scene. Let's just jump straight into, so this shot, as you can see, is like composed of kind of 3 shots, because it starts with this really wide, beautiful cityscape shot of the tower. And then we get closer, the camera is slowly moving forward. And then as we get closer in even more, it's still zooming in. So the very first shot, it's not zooming in. So I had a little bit of fun with like the vertigo and the effect and everything like that. So if you go back and watch it, you can kind of see there's way more movement going on there. And there's actually a lot of layers of movement. Okay, so here's the blend file. And if I go to the beginning, so you can really see it in the clay render just how much the buildings are moving, and you can kind of get the sense for the weird trippiness that's going on in the scene. So here's the setup. Yeah, it's very... some people are asking if this was an orthographic camera. It is not. It is just a very high focal length. You can see it's 180. I think this has kind of been the trend with all of these animations, is that the focal length is either 120 or 180 or 200 sometimes. And when the perspective is that squished, you can really move things around. They can be on really far layers, or they can be really close together, and it almost like the camera can't really tell. You get away with designing for the camera more. You do have to be careful, because like if a building is being animated and moving and it looks right outside the camera, it might be totally not noticeable through the camera, and then also vice versa. So that was what I did, is I animated the camera first. Kind of just, you can see how much it moves. It really, see the camera's barely moving, but where a lot of the movement is coming from is these buildings in the foreground. Essentially what I have is this foreground layer of buildings is attached to an empty right here. And then there's this kind of like third layer with the main building, and that building has an empty around it, and everything in this section is attached to this empty here. You can see if I grab this box, it moves this set of buildings. If I grab this empty, it moves this set of buildings. And then there's a couple of buildings here that are not parented to anything, and they're really just buildings that are either just standing still, like they don't need to be moving. And it doesn't matter because the camera is adding that additional movement, so it looks like everything is moving, but there's only a couple things that are. And then also, like, as you can see, that every building has its own pair of lighting and shadows, and the shadows and the light is something I explained, I think, pretty well in depth in one of the other videos, and I'll link that below. Essentially, every building has a window and then potentially a shadow. Some buildings don't have shadows parented to them, so that as the building is moving, the lighting is staying consistent. As we kind of scrub this along, you can see how everything is moving. Things are separating. Things are kind of moving further apart. And the reason is as the camera moves up, you can see it's really tiny. It's right here. So as the camera moves up, these background buildings, they move backward. They move backwards. And that, again, is adding to that, like, parallaxing, like, perspective shift effect, that vertigo effect. And also, most importantly, is this main building and this cube that is parenting all of these background buildings. What it's doing is it's kind of like raising up slightly, and it's tilting forward. In the camera view, the buildings in the foreground are moving down, and then the buildings in the background are almost like coming up and curving over you. And that was kind of the effect that I was going for, is like having them really look like they're dominating, and you're like coming into the heart of the city. I just think that was a really cool effect. It just makes it feel like it's massive, and almost like the city is like coming alive. It's like opening up as you right as you pass like this rooftop here, and it's just like a really trippy effect, and I really like the look of it. This is probably my most complicated scene, with the most complicated, like, little nuanced movement. Once I kind of parented everything, I started with the big motions. I really started with, like, I moved just the parented groups. I moved them in groups. So I animate this group, and then I animated this other group. So then everything is like start out big and then get smaller and smaller. What that ended up being was the smallest is just animating the individual buildings themselves. And that was kind of the cool thing about having the buildings as a set be paired to the empty. Then you can make adjustments to the buildings themselves, and the positions doesn't get affected because they're moving with the whole group anyway. So you can like make the building go up or down, and it'll still be moving forward or backward because it's tied to the empty. And a lot of these buildings are buildings that I've made over the course of like months, maybe. You know, my own building pack that I've released, some of the building packs that I've released over on Patreon, some of the buildings that you've seen me make on YouTube videos, and just kind of like making stuff over the course of just weeks. The ones like, for example, this one I have a YouTube video on, so you can watch the video for that if you don't know how I made this building. But for this one, this really interesting like Star Wars-y looking one, I really like this one. This one was also based on one that was in one of the screenshots, and I had just one angle of it, so I just, you know, made it and kind of had to make it up. And this one's pretty simple, so you can see it's just like a rectangle in the middle and then 2 cylinders next to it. And then from the, you know, the rooftop is all made up. I just kind of look at other parts of the animation for reference of the rooftops and how they handle them, and it really isn't like anything really interesting or special. So a lot of the stuff I kind of had to make up, but you can see if I go into it, this one's even a mirror modifier turned onto it. So if I turn that off, you can see it's just like one square, some faces are inset, and the faces that are inset have the texture of the let me go into material preview here. The textures that are inset have the window texture applied to them. And again, window texture, if you want to get it, it's on Gumroad, it's for free, you can mess with it. And then this one, you know, I would just throw on like a random concrete texture from Polyhaven. And really I try to keep the textures pretty minimal. If it was dark, a darker surface, I would just use the same texture but darken it, make a darker version. Again, this one I made on YouTube, so I don't need to go into it. And this one was even more simpler than, you know, than it seems. Is it was kind of like go like that, make it a rectangle. And then for the windows, I think I just looked at these like cross sections. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So up here, I would go like select these 2 and turn on screencast keys just for you, and then I'll scale it on the Z like maybe here, and then bevel it 3 times, just like that. So that's 1, 2, 3. Then I can grab these individual connections or these lines, bevel them 1 more time to make like that would be like the, you know, the division part. And then there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3 lines in between. So I would add like that, scale it in just a bit, and then I added 1 more on the edge just to kind of, so I didn't have to inset on that part. So we'll grab these again and then bevel like that. Yeah, I think I like these faces, they need to move down like this so that they're below. These faces need to move up, something like this, something along the lines of this. These need to move up. No, actually I think that's good. So then I'm gonna wrap this, wrap it like that. You can kind of get the idea. Something like this, and then I would just like inset it with E. I'm gonna go inside like that. And then I would just apply the window material straight across, and then just throw on like a, you know, a generic kind of like rooftop low spot. Take all of this, just make it F, extrude, inset, extrude again, then scale on the Y in a little bit, something like this. Take this shape, duplicate it, and then make like a square out of it. Just make like little shapes that look like they can be things like antennas or like boxes or like, you know, electric things, or because at the end of the day, you're not really seeing the tops of the buildings too much, at least not in this animation. Like this one specifically is just purely boxes. For this main building, honestly, it was kind of a pain in the butt because I didn't really take my time with it. I just like jumped straight in. I should have studied it a little bit better to make a little bit better sense of like what exactly it was and like the structure and everything, because it does look simple. It's like, okay, that's a cube, you know, these things are cubes, this is just, you know, shapes that are beveled and stuff. From the front in the animation, you really can't tell exactly like the structure of the building, and there's probably better angles of it and concept art you can find online. I really did have to just eyeball it from the one view that I had. The original video was like me doing it, then Control-Zing like 50 times, trying something like, no, like that doesn't look right, trying to add a loop cut, doesn't work because there's vertices somewhere else that are extra, going in, cleaning that up. It was a lot of like very messy, very amateurish 3D modeling that I was like, nah, it's not worth like putting y'all through that. And so in this shot, there's also like a ton of lighting. Let me kind of go over that as quickly as I can. So you can see there's a ton of lighting going on. It's really almost laggy because there's also the volumetric turned on. Let me see if I can turn that off. If I turn the volume off, it's a little bit better. There's all this, there's like this, the EV bloom, the classic EV bloom. There's ambient occlusion, all of this screen space reflections for the lights, and all of the lights, the power of them is like very, very high. So this one's a shadow. So this one's like pointed. So a lot of the ones I would make that are shadows are like negative value lights. I would point those at the roof because I'd want the top of the building to be dark and I want the bottom part to be lit. Even though there's no like global illumination everywhere, you know, there's still lights, and there's screen space reflections. So they're reflecting off of things. And if some buildings' lights get close to another building, it like kind of leaks into it. And if I don't want that to happen, so that I would then go back in and purposefully include these like negative light values that would like suck the light out of the area, and it would just project the shadow onto it. I don't know. I really don't know how it works. It just does a negative value of a light. It's kind of crazy. Now, some of them like needed it, some of them didn't need it, especially with the buildings with these lights on the top. Like it helped pop those out a little bit more, help them stand out. And then all of these window lights, they're all just various versions. They're all like duplicates of each other, and then I just slightly adjust. So I would just add curves, and I would make like little adjustments to either to the emission value, to like the curve, to the color. Yeah, I would go in here in the color ramp and make adjustments to what colors are being seen. And then for the closer shots, let me pop that one open. So then this one is the shot that comes like immediately after. So this one, the setup is a little bit different. You can see that all of the foreground buildings are gone. And this is what I did, is I took that first scene, I duplicated it, and then I just chopped a lot of it off. I chopped the whole front part off, and then I unparented everything because it was very messily like parented, and it was a mess. It was a messy family, if that makes sense. The kids were, yeah, they were not happy. Then I reparented everything. Everyone got a parent. And some of the buildings you can see are like clipping into it, but again, it's like just for the camera. I mean, that building, you don't even see it, so it doesn't even matter. But what's happening here is same thing. So the camera is right here, and if I animate it, you can see that the camera is moving slightly forward. This main building standing still, not moving at all. These foreground buildings, these foreground ones are parented to an empty, which is moving slightly towards the camera. You can see it even here on the side. What's kind of happening, these are moving off camera so that they feel closer. Like the faster they move off camera, or the faster they move past the camera, the closer they are, or the closer they seem like they are. And then this building slowly gets revealed until it's just fully that building in frame. There's nothing else underneath of it. And then all of this stuff you can see from this empty backwards, everything is designed to cover those two sides. There's nothing directly behind the building. It's only designed to frame the sides of the shot. And what those buildings are doing is, I don't even know if the focal length is changing. Is it changing? It's not. So it's still 24 the whole time, but it looks like the focal length is changing. It looks like it's doing that perspective shift, that effect that you kind of see in movies sometimes when like somebody like takes a drug and then like, or whatever, they get hit with hard news. I don't really use, but you've seen them, I'm sure, in films. I'll try to find a video for it and then maybe like link it down below if I can find it. But that's what's happening here, is that this building is exactly the same, not moving, and all of the movement is happening in the background buildings, and they're just kind of moving back. They're kind of, some of them are moving further back than others. I wanted it to be there, but I didn't want it to be happening too fast. Like I think any faster the movement or anything, it would have just been like too aggressive. And then the very last shot is the one where it's like right up against the building. And then for this shot, I did have to add a little bit. You can see that there's really nothing left there. I just took that main building and made it super huge. I copied that first or that second scene and just made the building really, really big in order to like get the camera closer to it. So the camera is like right up against the front, and I did do a little bit of additional detail passes. So like all of this stuff here wasn't here in the earlier building. So what I did is the texture is like, it's gotta be like, what is it? It's 4K, it's a 4K texture from Polyhaven. And then I scaled it up, or I scaled it down just a little bit, or, you know, I made the size a little bit bigger on the UV map, not smaller. I don't know if that makes sense. Here, the scale of that texture is 10, whereas before it was like 50 or something like that. But because you're close now, I did want you to be able to see some of that texture. So that's what you see in the building. And then I did update the geometry a bit, just really roughly, nothing too, I used the knife tool to kind of add these little panels, these panel cuts into the structure. So like if I press K, like kind of go like this, press enter, and then select this edge, use the bevel tool, scroll up once, select this inside one, and just kind of like bring it up like that. So that it would create like this crack, just, you know, I saw that in the reference when you look at it up close. And I also don't think the camera in this one is shifting focal lengths. Yeah, you can see here, it's just 12. It's actually 12, which is like crazy. All of these were fully initially done for portrait. That's why like the very first shot is like very vertical. Things are kind of like separating on the Z-axis, whereas I would probably have them moving sideways if it was more of a wide shot. So let me jump out of Blender, and then one last stage was I brought all of those clips, I rendered them, and I brought them into DaVinci Resolve. And I'm using the free version, so I kind of like that I'm at this state where all of the stuff I'm doing is like using free software. And if I can provide you like assets and content and tutorials that you can use without like paying for anything, I feel like that's that job well done. So for this one, this one where the very first clip where it's opening up, there is a little bit of effects here, and you can see that there's a glow. There's like this soft kind of glow over everything. And then there's light rays. And again, these are both very subtle effects. I couldn't get the bloom exactly how I wanted, that really soft bloom that I have been able to get with all the other renders. I just think there's too many lights. It was too much of a distance, too crazy of a scene. So I just wanted to give it a little bit of that extra bloom, and that's what I brought it into DaVinci for. But that's the only thing here. This second shot is exactly as is, no adjustments made. And then there's a cross dissolve to this shot, and this is purely because that's how it was done in the original, and I like that. So I thought it would be a great little, like a reference of the original one. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. If you want to see a full version of this video, like me going more in depth and all that kind of stuff, I got a ton of that stuff on Patreon. I'm putting up assets, I'm putting up like tutorial videos, all this kind of stuff. You can get that over there. Yeah, and if you just want to support me, perfect place to do that as well. But otherwise, yeah, I'm really stoked with how far this came, and I'm really happy with the end result, and I'm really happy that everyone was liking it and it's doing really well. The next one is going to be a little of a change of pace, but it's still going to be anime related. Yeah, I got something interesting, so you'll want to be subscribed and stick around for that. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.